Picture this. You've spent months planning the perfect wedding, saved every penny for your dream dress, and trusted your family with something irreplaceable. Now, imagine walking into your childhood bedroom 3 days before your wedding to find that same dress hanging in your closet. Except it's no longer the pristine ivory gown you remember. Instead, it's a psychedelic swirl of hot pink, electric blue, and lime green tie-dye, with your sister standing beside it, grinning like she just solved world hunger. "We made it unique," she announces proudly, as if she'd just handed you the keys to a new car instead of the remnants of your shattered dreams. This is exactly what happened to 24-year-old Ruby Chen-Martinez on a humid Tuesday afternoon in Phoenix, Arizona. But what started as the worst betrayal of her young life became something she never could have imagined, a journey that would transform not just how she saw her family, but how she saw herself.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
Ruby had always been the responsible one. While her older sister Madison threw paint-splattered art parties in their parents' garage, and her younger brother Jake spent his weekends building elaborate skateboard ramps that usually ended in emergency room visits, Ruby was the one who color-coded her textbooks, maintained a 4.0 GPA through college, and had her 5-year plan laminated and pinned to her bedroom wall by age 16. So when she met David Kellerman at her first job out of college, a buttoned-up accounting position at Morrison & Associates in downtown Phoenix, it felt like destiny clicking into place. David was everything Ruby thought she wanted: stable, predictable, and completely devoted to their carefully planned future together. He proposed exactly 18 months after their first date, just as Ruby had calculated he would, with a modest solitaire ring and a speech about mutual goals and financial compatibility. The wedding planning began immediately. Ruby approached it with the same methodical precision she applied to everything else in her life. She created detailed spreadsheets for vendors, color-coded timelines, and a budget so precise it accounted for the tax on napkin rings. But there was one element of the wedding that transcended all her careful calculations: the dress. Ruby had discovered it at a small boutique in Old Town Scottsdale during her very first dress shopping expedition. The moment she saw it hanging in the window, everything else seemed to fade away. It wasn't the most expensive dress in the shop, nor was it the most elaborate, but something about its simple elegance spoke to a part of Ruby she rarely acknowledged, the part that sometimes yearned for something beyond spreadsheets and 5-year plans. The dress was a classic A-line silhouette in the softest ivory silk, with delicate pearl buttons running up the back and subtle lace detailing along the neckline. When Ruby tried it on for the first time, her mother, Ruby Chen-Martinez, actually started crying, something Ruby had only seen happen twice in her 24 years. "Mija," her mother whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "you look like an angel." Even Madison, who had rolled her eyes at Ruby's boring wedding plans for months, went uncharacteristically quiet when Ruby emerged from the dressing room. For a moment, she saw something shift in her sister's expression, a flicker of genuine admiration that made Ruby stand a little taller. The dress cost more than Ruby had originally budgeted, but she couldn't bring herself to care. She put it on her credit card and felt that for the first time in months of wedding planning, she had made a decision based purely on how something made her feel, rather than how it fit into her master plan. Ruby's relationship with her family had always been complicated. As the middle child in a household where creativity and chaos reigned supreme, she had often felt like an outsider in her own home. Her father, Miguel Martinez, was a freelance graphic designer whose income fluctuated wildly depending on his artistic inspiration and the market's demand for his particular style of vibrant, culturally infused artwork. Her mother, Elena, had given up her career as a high school art teacher when Jake was born, instead channeling her creative energy into elaborate home projects that left their house in a constant state of beautiful disarray. Madison, now 27, had inherited their parents' artistic souls in full force. She made a living, barely, selling abstract paintings and teaching art classes to children at the local community center. Her life was a whirlwind of gallery openings, paint-stained clothes, and passionate speeches about the importance of authentic self-expression. She lived in the converted garage behind their parents' house, which she had transformed into a combination studio and living space that looked like a rainbow had exploded in the most wonderful way possible. Jake, at 21, was still finding his way, but seemed determined to do so as loudly and dramatically as possible. Currently, he was pursuing what he called extreme architectural photography, which mostly involved him scaling buildings and construction sites with his camera to capture the raw essence of urban development. This hobby had resulted in 3 arrests, countless arguments with security guards, and some genuinely stunning photographs that even Ruby had to admit were pretty incredible. In this family of vibrant personalities and unpredictable pursuits, Ruby had carved out her identity as the practical one, the planner, the person everyone could count on to remember birthdays, organize family gatherings, and handle anything requiring attention to detail or long-term thinking. It was a role she wore with pride, even if it sometimes felt a little lonely. As her wedding day approached, Ruby found herself looking forward to the moment when she could step out of that role, at least temporarily. She imagined walking down the aisle in her perfect dress, feeling elegant and special and completely herself. Not Ruby, the responsible one, or Ruby, the organizer, but just Ruby, beautiful and radiant on the most important day of her life. 3 weeks before the wedding, Elena asked if she could keep the dress at the family house instead of Ruby's apartment. She explained, "The lighting is better in my room for the final fitting, and Madison wants to help with any last-minute alterations if needed. Plus, you know how cramped your place is, mija. The dress will be safer here."
Ruby hesitated. Her small apartment was indeed cramped, and she had been worried about keeping the dress wrinkle-free in her tiny closet. The family house had plenty of space, and her mother's bedroom had a large walk-in closet that would be perfect for storing the dress properly. "Okay," Ruby agreed, "but please be careful with it. And don't let anyone else handle it without me there, okay?" "Of course, mija. We'll treat it like the treasure it is." Ruby carefully transported the dress to her childhood home, hanging it in the back of her parents' closet and making sure it was covered with the breathable garment bag the boutique had provided. She felt a small pang of anxiety leaving it there, but pushed the feeling aside. This was her family. They understood how important this was to her. For the next 2.5 weeks, Ruby threw herself into the final wedding preparations. She confirmed details with the caterer, finalized the seating chart, and had what felt like 1,000 conversations with David about timing and logistics. She was so busy that she barely had time to visit her family, instead relying on quick phone calls and text messages to stay in touch. Madison had been particularly enthusiastic about the wedding lately, texting Ruby almost daily with suggestions for adding some personality to the reception. Ruby mostly ignored these messages, assuming they were just Madison being Madison, always wanting to inject more color and creativity into everything. "You should let me paint something for the reception," Madison had suggested during one phone call. "Maybe a backdrop for photos or some custom signage." "That's sweet, Maddie, but everything's already planned. Maybe for the anniversary party or something?" "But Ruby, this is your chance to really express who you are. Don't you want the wedding to feel like you?" "It will feel like me. I planned the whole thing." Ruby heard her sister sigh on the other end of the line. "Okay, but if you change your mind..." "I won't change my mind. Love you, but I've got to run. David and I are meeting with the photographer in 20 minutes. Now, standing in her childhood bedroom and staring at what had once been her dream dress, Ruby realized that perhaps she should have paid more attention to those conversations. The dress hanging before her was unrecognizable, transformed from classic elegance into something that belonged at a music festival rather than a traditional wedding. Madison stood beside the closet, practically bouncing with excitement, her hands stained with what Ruby now realized was fabric dye. "Isn't it amazing?" Madison gashed. "I know it's not what you originally planned, but Ruby, this is so much more you. The colors represent your energy, your passion, all the parts of yourself you usually keep hidden.
Mom and I worked on it for 3 days straight. We wanted to surprise you with something that would really make you stand out on your big day." Ruby's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Behind Madison, their mother appeared in the doorway, her expression shifting from proud excitement to growing concern as she took in Ruby's reaction. "Mija?" Elena said tentatively. "Don't you like it?" Ruby found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. You dyed my wedding dress." "We transformed it," Madison corrected enthusiastically. "Look at these colors! Ruby, when was the last time you wore something this bold? This is your chance to show everyone who you really are instead of hiding behind all that beige and cream you usually wear." "I chose ivory," Ruby said, her voice growing stronger. "I chose that dress exactly as it was because that's what I wanted. That's who I am." Madison's face fell slightly, but she pressed on. "But Ruby, you're so much more vibrant than you let yourself be. Remember when we were kids and you used to paint with me? You had such an amazing sense of color before you decided everything had to be practical and neutral." "I was 7 years old, Madison, and this is my wedding dress. My wedding is in 3 days." The room fell silent. Ruby could hear her heart pounding in her ears as the full weight of the situation began to sink in. This wasn't just about a dress. This was about something much deeper, something she wasn't sure she was ready to examine. Elena stepped forward, her maternal instincts finally overriding her artistic enthusiasm. "Mija, we thought you would love it. We thought we were giving you a gift." Ruby looked at her mother, then at Madison, then back at the dress that represented everything she had thought she wanted for her wedding day night. In that moment, something began to shift inside her, a crack in the carefully constructed foundation of who she thought she was supposed to be. But for now, all she could focus on was the immediate reality. Her wedding was in 3 days, and her dress looked like a rainbow had exploded all over it. "I need some air," Ruby managed to say, and walked out of the room, leaving her family standing beside the psychedelic remains of her carefully planned dreams.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Ruby's hands were shaking as she dialed David's number. She had walked 3 blocks from her family's house in the sweltering Phoenix heat, her mind reeling with disbelief and rage. The familiar comfort of David's voice when he answered felt like a lifeline. "Hey, babe, how's the final dress fitting going?" His tone was cheerful, completely unaware that Ruby's world had just imploded. "David?" Ruby's voice cracked. "You need to come pick me up. Now." "What's wrong? You sound—" "They ruined it." The words came out in a rush. "My family ruined my dress. They tie-dyed it, David. They turned my beautiful ivory wedding dress into some kind of hippie nightmare, and they think they did me a favor." There was a long pause. David's methodical mind was probably trying to process what she'd just told him, the same way he processed quarterly reports or tax documents. "I'm sorry, what? They did what to your dress?" Ruby found herself laughing, but it wasn't a happy sound. It was the laugh of someone who had reached the absolute limit of their sanity. "Hot pink, Davy, electric blue, lime green. My sister Madison thought she was expressing my true self or some artistic nonsense. 3 days before our wedding, and I have nothing to wear." Okay, stay calm. I'm leaving the office right now. Where are you?" Ruby looked around, realizing she was standing in front of Martinez Family Market, the small grocery store owned by her father's cousin. The irony wasn't lost on her. Even in her moment of complete breakdown, she was surrounded by her family's influence. "Corner of Baseline and 16th Street, by Primo's store. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Don't do anything rash." "Don't do anything rash?" Ruby almost laughed again. What exactly constituted rash in this situation? Going back inside and screaming at her family? Canceling the wedding? Setting the tie-dyed dress on fire? While she waited, Ruby's phone buzzed with a text from her maid of honor and best friend since college, Jessica Williams.
How did the final fitting go? I'm so excited to see you in that gorgeous dress on Saturday. Ruby stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, "Call me. Emergency." Her phone rang immediately. "Ruby, what's wrong?" "Jess, I need you to go dress shopping with me. Today. Right now." "What? But you already have your dress. You've been obsessing over that dress for months. You sent me like 50 photos of it." "Not anymore." Ruby explained the situation, and Jessica's responses progressed from confusion to disbelief to outrage. "They did what? Ruby, that's insane. That's beyond insane. Who does that?" "Apparently my family does that." "Okay, deep breaths. We can fix this. There are tons of bridal shops in Phoenix. We'll find something else." 3 days before the wedding, Jess. What are the chances of finding anything decent that doesn't need major alterations? "We'll figure it out. That's what best friends are for." When David arrived, Ruby could see the stress written all over his usually composed face. David Kellerman was not a man who dealt well with unexpected problems. He thrived on predictability, schedules, and well-thought-out solutions. A tie-dyed wedding dress definitely did not fall into any of those categories. "Show me," he said, as Ruby got into his pristine Honda Civic. They drove back to the family house in tense silence. Ruby used David's key fob to let them in through the garage, hoping to avoid another confrontation with Madison or her parents. But as they made their way toward the bedroom, Ruby could hear voices from the kitchen. Her entire family, plus what sounded like several other relatives. She just doesn't understand artistic vision. I mean, I get that she's upset, but once she sees how amazing it looks with the right accessories... "Madison, mija, maybe we should have asked first." "Asked?" Ruby recognized her father, Miguel's voice. "We should have asked before we destroyed our daughter's wedding dress? What were you two thinking?" "It's not destroyed, it's enhanced." Ruby's always been afraid to express her creative side. This is our gift to her, permission to be vibrant. Permission? Ruby hadn't realized she was speaking out loud until the kitchen fell silent. She walked into the room with David close behind her and found herself facing not just her immediate family, but also her Aunt Carmen, her cousin Sophia, and her grandmother, Abuela Rosa, who had flown in from Tucson for the wedding. The kitchen fell into an uncomfortable silence. Ruby could feel everyone's eyes on her, waiting to see how she would react now that she'd had time to process the situation. "Permission to be vibrant?" Ruby repeated, her voice dangerously calm. "Madison, I'm 24 years old. I don't need permission from anyone to be anything, and I certainly don't need my family to vandalize my wedding dress to prove some point about artistic expression." Madison's face flushed. "Ruby, that's not what—" "No, let me finish." Ruby surprised herself with the steel in her voice. "You want to talk about artistic vision? Fine. My artistic vision was an elegant, classic wedding. My artistic vision was feeling beautiful and sophisticated on the most important day of my life. Your artistic vision apparently involves forcing your aesthetic onto everyone else whether they want it or not." Abuela Rosa, who, at 83, had seen enough family drama to fill several telenovelas, cleared her throat. "Ruby, mija, maybe you should see the dress with fresh eyes. Sometimes art is about challenging what we think we want. With all due respect, Abuela, this isn't about art. This is about respect and trust and boundaries." Ruby's voice was getting stronger with each word. "I trusted my family with something irreplaceable, and you decided that what I wanted wasn't good enough." David stepped forward, and Ruby could see he was trying to be diplomatic. "Maybe there's a way to reverse the process or work with what's been done?"
Madison brightened immediately.
Exactly. David gets it. Ruby, we could add some gold accents, maybe some crystal beading to complement the colors.
"Stop." Ruby held up her hand. "Just stop. I am not wearing a tie-dyed wedding dress. I am not working with what you've done. I'm going to go find a new dress, and I'm going to pretend this never happened." Elena looked stricken. "Ruby, we can't afford to buy another dress. The wedding expenses have already stretched us." "I'll pay for it myself," Ruby cut her off. "I should have kept the dress at my apartment. I should have trusted my instincts instead of listening to you about
better lighting and safer storage. Ruby, Miguel said gently, we understand you're upset, but maybe we can all take a step back and... No, Papa, there's no stepping back. The dress is ruined. My perfect wedding dress that I saved for months to buy, that made me feel beautiful for the first time in my life, is gone. And instead of apologizing, everyone wants me to be grateful for something I never asked for. The room fell silent again. Ruby could feel tears threatening, but she refused to cry in front of everyone. She had done enough crying for one day. Jake, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during the entire exchange, finally spoke up. Ruby, I know this sucks, but maybe this is kind of a sign. A sign of what? I don't know, that maybe the whole wedding is too controlled. Like maybe it's okay for some things to be unexpected. Ruby stared at her younger brother, amazed that even Jake was taking Madison's side in this exchange. Jake, when you plan a wedding, unexpected is not good. Unexpected is a nightmare. I have spent 8 months planning every single detail of this wedding so that nothing would go wrong. And now, 3 days before the ceremony, I have to start over with the most important element of the entire day. But what if starting over isn't the worst thing? Jake pressed on. What if this is your chance to do something different? Something more you? This is me, Ruby exploded. The planning, the organization, the attention to detail, that's who I am. The dress I chose was perfect for who I am. I don't need to be transformed or enhanced or made more vibrant. I was perfectly happy with who I was before you all decided I needed to be fixed. David reached for her hand. Ruby, maybe we should go look at dresses. We can discuss all this later after we've solved the immediate problem. Ruby nodded, grateful that at least one person in the room understood priorities. That's what we're doing. Jess is meeting us at the bridal district. As they moved toward the door, Madison called out, Ruby, wait, I really thought... I was trying to give you something special, something that would make you stand out and show everyone how amazing you are. Ruby turned back to face her sister. For a moment, she could see past her anger to the genuine hurt and confusion in Madison's eyes. But the tie-dyed dress hanging in their parents' bedroom stood as a colorful testament to the fundamental misunderstanding between them. Madison, I know you thought you were helping, but this is exactly what I mean about boundaries. You assumed you knew what I wanted better than I did. You assumed that the choices I made for myself weren't good enough. And now I have to spend the next 3 days fixing a problem I never should have had. So you're just gonna find another boring dress and pretend this never happened? The words hit Ruby like a physical blow. Boring. Even her own sister saw her as boring. Yes, Ruby said quietly. I am going to find another boring dress because apparently boring is what I am. And apparently boring isn't good enough for this family. As they walked out to David's car, Ruby could hear the voices in the kitchen starting up again. Her family, no doubt, discussing what had just happened and probably planning their next intervention in her life. The afternoon sun was brutal as they drove toward the bridal district in central Phoenix. Ruby stared out the window at the familiar landscape of strip malls and palm trees, feeling like everything she thought she knew about herself and her family had been turned upside down in the span of a few hours. We'll find something, David said, reaching over to squeeze her hand. It might not be the original dress, but we'll find something appropriate for the wedding. Appropriate. Ruby almost smiled at David's word choice. Not beautiful, not perfect, not special, appropriate. It occurred to her that maybe appropriate was exactly what the relationship was too. They were appropriate for each other. Same values, same goals, same approach to life. But as she thought about the passion in Madison's voice when she talked about art, or the excitement in Jake's eyes when he showed her his latest photographs, Ruby wondered when appropriate had started feeling like settling. Her phone buzzed with another text from Jessica. On my way to David's bridal on Camelback. Don't panic, we've got this. Ruby typed back, Thank you. I don't know what I'd do without you.
But as they pulled into the parking lot of the first bridal shop, Ruby realized that finding a new dress was the least of her problems. The real question was whether she was ready to confront what the morning's events had revealed about her family, her fiancé, and, most frighteningly, herself. The first bridal shop was a disaster. Ruby walked into elegant bridal boutique on Camelback Road with David and Jessica flanking her like bodyguards, only to discover that finding a wedding dress 3 days before a wedding was apparently equivalent to asking for a miracle. "Oh, honey, no," said Brenda, the shop manager, a woman in her 50s with perfectly styled silver hair and sympathetic eyes. "3 days? For alterations alone, we need at least 2 weeks. And our sample sizes—" She looked Ruby up and down with a practiced eye. "You're, what, a size 8, 10? Most of our samples are size 12 or 14. You'd be swimming in anything we have." Ruby felt her carefully constructed composure beginning to crack. "There has to be something, anything." Brenda's expression softened. "Let me show you what we have in stock, but I'm not going to lie to you, it's going to be limited." What followed was an hour of increasingly desperate trying on of dresses that were either too big, too small, too elaborate, or completely wrong for the outdoor garden ceremony Ruby had planned. Each dress she tried on seemed to mock her situation more than the last. "What about this one?" Jessica held up a beaded monstrosity that looked like it belonged at a Las Vegas-themed wedding. "Absolutely not," Ruby and David said simultaneously. "Okay, what about something simple? Clean lines." Brenda pulled out a sleek sheath dress that was undeniably elegant, but also undeniably too small. Ruby tried to zip it up, but the zipper stopped halfway up her back. She stared at herself in the three-way mirror, half-dressed and completely defeated. "I can't do this," she whispered. Jessica immediately stepped forward. "Ruby, we've only been to one shop. There are at least 6 more on the street alone." "Look at me, Jess," Ruby gestured at her reflection. "This is hopeless. I'm going to have to get married in something from my closet, or cancel the wedding, or—" Her voice trailed off as a terrible thought occurred to her. "Or what?" asked David, though his tone suggested he wasn't sure he wanted to know. "Or wear the tie-dyed dress." The silence in the dressing room was deafening. "Ruby," said Jessica carefully, "you don't have to wear that dress. We will find you something else." "But what if we don't? What if this is some kind of cosmic sign that I should just accept what my family did and move on?" David looked horrified. "Ruby, you can't be serious. That dress is completely inappropriate for our wedding. Think about the photos. Think about what the guests will say." His reaction stung more than Ruby expected. Not because he was wrong, the dress was inappropriate for the wedding they had planned, but because his immediate concern was about appearances rather than her feelings. "You're right," Ruby said quietly. "Let's try the next shop." The second shop, Bridal Dreams, was slightly more promising. They had a few dresses in Ruby's size, and the owner, Mrs. Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, was willing to work with them on rush alterations. "I can have my seamstress come in tonight and tomorrow," Mrs. Chen explained as Ruby stood on a small pedestal wearing a simple A-line dress that was surprisingly flattering. "It won't be perfect, but it'll be wearable." The dress was nice. Not spectacular, not the dress of her dreams, but nice. It was ivory silk, like her original dress, with a sweetheart neckline and minimal detailing. It was exactly the kind of appropriate, elegant dress that David would approve of and that would photograph well. "It's lovely," Jessica said, though her voice lacked genuine enthusiasm. "It's suitable," David agreed, which was apparently his version of a ringing endorsement. Ruby stared at herself in the mirror. The dress was fine. It was more than fine. It was exactly what she should want. But as she looked at her reflection, all she could think about was the way she had felt when she first tried on her original dress. The joy, the sense of rightness, the feeling that she had found something truly special. This dress didn't make her feel anything except tired. "I will take it," Ruby said. Because what else could she say? As Mrs. Chen bustled around taking measurements and discussing alteration details, Ruby's phone rang. It was her mother. "Mija, please don't hang up," Elena said before Ruby could even say hello. "I need to talk to you." "Mom, I'm kind of in the middle of something." "I know you're dress shopping. Abuela Rosa told me I needed to call you. She says I owe you an apology."
Ruby stepped outside the shop, leaving David and Jessica to handle the dress details. The late afternoon Phoenix heat hit her like a wall, but she welcomed the privacy. "You do owe me an apology," Ruby said bluntly. "I know. Ruby, I am so sorry. When Madison showed me her idea, I got caught up in her excitement. She was so happy to be doing something special for you, and I thought maybe she was right. Maybe you needed a little push to show your creative side." "My creative side?" Ruby felt the familiar surge of frustration. "Mom, what if this is my creative side? What if being organized and traditional and, yes, even boring is exactly who I am? Why does everyone assume I need to be fixed?" There was a long pause. "Are you happy, Mija?" The question caught Ruby off guard. "What do you mean? With David, with the wedding you've planned, with your life. Are you happy?" Ruby opened her mouth to give an automatic yes, but the words stuck in her throat. Was she happy? Or was she just comfortable, secure, following the plan she had set for herself? "I don't know why that matters," Ruby said finally. "It matters because you're my daughter, and I want you to be happy, not appropriate, not successful, happy." "Ruby, I have to go. Mrs. Chen is waiting for me to approve the alterations." "Ruby, wait. There's something else. Madison, she's been crying all afternoon. She really thought she was doing something wonderful for you. I'm not saying what we did was right, but her heart was in the right place."
Ruby closed her eyes. Even when her family was apologizing, they were somehow making it about Madison's feelings rather than the fact that they had destroyed her dress. "I'll talk to her later," Ruby said. "I need to get through today first." When Ruby went back inside, she found David and Jessica in what appeared to be a tense conversation that immediately stopped when they saw her. "Everything okay?" Ruby asked. "Fine," David said quickly. "Mrs. Chen says the dress will be ready by Friday afternoon. That gives us time for a final fitting before the rehearsal dinner." Ruby nodded, though something about David's tone made her suspect the conversation she had interrupted was about more than alteration timelines. As they left the shop, Jessica linked her arm through Ruby's. "Want to get coffee? I think we could all use some caffeine and sugar after this afternoon." They ended up at a small cafe in Old Town Scottsdale, sitting under an umbrella on the patio despite the heat. Ruby ordered an iced latte and found herself staring at the tourists wandering past, all of them looking relaxed and carefree in their vacation clothes. "Okay," Jessica said, stirring her iced tea. "Let's talk about what just happened back there." "What do you mean?" Ruby asked, though she suspected she knew. "I mean the look on your face when you saw yourself in that dress. Ruby, you look like someone going to her own funeral, not her wedding." David shifted uncomfortably. "The dress is appropriate for the occasion. It's a good choice given the circumstances." "Appropriate?" Ruby repeated flatly. "David, no offense, but your fiancée just had her dream dress destroyed by her family, and your biggest concern is that the replacement is appropriate?" "What else should my concern be?" David's voice took on a defensive edge. "We have a wedding in 3 days. We need a dress that fits, that looks good in photos, and that won't embarrass us in front of our guests." "What about a dress that makes Ruby feel beautiful? What about a dress that makes her happy?" Ruby watched this exchange with growing unease. It felt like David and Jessica were having a fight about her rather than with her, and she wasn't sure she wanted to hear what either of them had to say. "The original dress made me feel beautiful," Ruby said quietly, "but that's not an option anymore." "But you could make it an option," Jessica said gently. "Ruby, I saw pictures of that tie-dye dress on Madison's Instagram. It's actually kind of amazing." Ruby stared at her best friend in shock. "You saw pictures?" "Madison posted them about an hour ago. She's proud of what she did. And honestly, it's not what I would choose, but it's striking. It's bold. It's very you, actually." "It's very not me," David interjected. "Ruby is not a tie-dyed wedding dress person." "How do you know?" Jessica challenged. "Have you ever asked her? Ruby, when was the last time you wore bright colors?" Ruby thought about it and realized she couldn't remember. Her closet was full of neutrals, blacks, navy blues, and the occasional burgundy for special occasions. Even her pajamas were solid colors and muted tones.
I don't look good in bright colors, Ruby said automatically. Says who? Says, I don't know. Says everyone. Says common sense. Jessica pulled out her phone and scrolled to Madison's Instagram page. Look at this picture and tell me you don't look radiant. Ruby reluctantly looked at the screen. Madison had posted a photo from Ruby's childhood, Ruby at 7, covered in paint from head to toe, grinning at the camera with what looked like genuine joy. Her hair was in pigtails, there was a streak of yellow paint across her cheek, and she was wearing a tie-dyed t-shirt that was somehow both hideous and perfect. The caption read, "Found this while going through old photos for Ruby's wedding slideshow. This is the Ruby I was trying to bring back, the one who wasn't afraid of getting messy. Red heart, hashtag TBD, hashtag sisterlove, hashtag wedding week." Ruby stared at the photo for a long moment. She barely remembered being that child, the one who painted with abandon and didn't worry about getting dirty or making mistakes. "I was 7, Ruby said finally. "So? 7-year-old Ruby looks pretty happy to me." David reached across the table and took Ruby's hand. "Ruby, you don't need to be that person. You've grown up. You've become successful and responsible and mature. That's a good thing." But as Ruby looked at the photo again, she found herself wondering, when exactly had I stopped being the girl who wasn't afraid to get messy? And more importantly, had that been her choice, or had it just happened gradually, one safe decision at a time? "I need to think about this," Ruby said, pulling her hand away from David. "I need to think about all of this." "Think about what?" David asked, and there was something in his voice that Ruby had never heard before, something that might have been fear. "I don't know yet," Ruby said honestly. "But for the first time in 8 months of wedding planning, I actually don't know what comes next." As they sat in the cafe, the sun beginning to set over the desert mountains, Ruby realized that maybe not knowing what came next wasn't the worst thing in the world. Maybe it was exactly what she needed.
The rehearsal dinner was supposed to be perfect. Ruby had planned it down to the last detail. An elegant gathering at Desert Botanical Garden, with string lights twinkling overhead and carefully curated appetizers that would photograph beautifully for social media. She had even created a timeline for the evening, complete with designated moments for toasts and photo opportunities. But as Ruby stood in the bathroom of the venue at 7:30 p.m. on Friday night, staring at her reflection in her carefully chosen rehearsal outfit, a navy blue wrap dress that Jessica had diplomatically described as very professional, she felt like she was watching someone else's life unfold. The replacement wedding dress hung in her childhood bedroom, pressed and ready for tomorrow. Mrs. Chen had done an excellent job with the alterations. It fit perfectly, looked appropriate, and would photograph well. David had approved of it with the same enthusiasm he showed for quarterly tax reports. Everything was proceeding according to plan. So why did Ruby feel like she was suffocating? A knock on the bathroom door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Ruby, it's me." Jessica's voice carried a note of concern. Ruby opened the door to find her best friend holding 2 glasses of wine and wearing an expression of barely concealed worry. "Thought you might need this," Jessica said, handing over one of the glasses. "You've been in here for 15 minutes. People are starting to ask questions." "What kind of questions?" "Is the bride having second thoughts" kind of questions. Ruby took a large sip of wine and immediately felt slightly better or slightly worse. It was hard to tell. Am I that obvious? To me, yes. To everyone else, they probably just think you're nervous about tomorrow. Jessica paused. Are you nervous about tomorrow? It was such a simple question, but Ruby found herself unable to answer it. Was nervous the right word for what she was feeling? Or was it something deeper than that? "Come on," Jessica said gently. "Your guests are waiting. We can talk about this later." Ruby followed Jessica back to the main area of the venue, where about 30 of their closest family and friends were mingling under the desert stars. The scene was exactly what Ruby had envisioned, elegant, sophisticated, and perfectly orchestrated. David was standing near the appetizer table with his parents, Robert and Patricia Kellerman, discussing something that appeared to involve a lot of serious nodding. David's parents were exactly what central casting would order if asked for
conservative suburban couple. Robert was an insurance claims adjuster who wore polo shirts year-round and had strong opinions about lawn maintenance. Patricia taught third grade and had never missed a PTA meeting in 20 years. They were kind, reliable people who had raised David to be the same. As Ruby approached the group, she caught the tail end of their conversation. "It's important to maintain certain standards," Patricia was saying. "A wedding sets the tone for the entire marriage." "Absolutely," Robert agreed. "David told us about the dress situation. Unfortunate, but at least you found something appropriate at the last minute." Ruby felt her smile freeze on her face. David had told his parents about the dress? About her family's situation? "What exactly did David tell you?" Ruby asked, her voice carefully neutral. David looked uncomfortable. "I just mentioned that there was a small issue with your original dress and that we had to find a replacement. No big deal." "A small issue," Ruby repeated. Patricia Killerman jumped in with what she probably thought was helpfulness. "David explained that your sister had some kind of artistic episode and damaged your dress. Don't worry, dear. We completely understand that you can't control your family's eccentricities." The word eccentricities hit Ruby like a slap. She looked at David, who was suddenly very interested in studying the appetizer selection. "Excuse me," Ruby said politely. "I need to check on something with the caterer." She walked away before anyone could respond, her heart pounding with a mixture of embarrassment and rage. David had told his parents that her family was eccentric, that Madison had had an artistic episode, that her family's behavior was something Ruby needed to apologize for or explain away. Ruby found herself near the entrance to the garden where the evening desert air provided some relief from the heat of her anger. She was so focused on processing what had just happened that she didn't notice her father approaching until he was standing right beside her. "You look like you could use some company, mija," Miguel said quietly. Ruby looked at her father. Really looked at her father, for what felt like the first time in months. Miguel Martinez was wearing his one good suit, the charcoal gray one he brought out for weddings and funerals and parent-teacher conferences. But he had paired it with a tie that was clearly one of his own designs, a subtle pattern of desert wildflowers in muted blues and greens that somehow managed to be both artistic and appropriate. "Papa, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you think our family is eccentric?" Miguel considered this seriously, the way he considered all of Ruby's concerns. It was one of the things she had always loved about her father. He never dismissed her concerns or gave her quick, easy answers. "I think our family is passionate," he said finally. "We feel things deeply. We express ourselves honestly. Some people find that intense. David's parents think you're all crazy. David's parents don't know us." Ruby felt tears threatening again. "Maybe they're right, though. Maybe Madison ruining my dress is just proof that our family doesn't understand boundaries or respect or normal behavior."
Miguel was quiet for a long moment, watching the desert landscape that stretched beyond the garden walls. "Ruby, can I tell you something about the night you were born?" Ruby nodded, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear another family story right now. "Your mother had been in labor for 18 hours. The doctors were talking about a C-section. I was terrified, not just about the surgery, but about becoming a father. I kept thinking about all the ways I could mess up, all the mistakes I might make." Miguel's voice was soft with memory. "And then you arrived. And the first thing you did was grab onto my finger and hold on tight. The nurse said most babies don't have that kind of grip strength. You knew what you wanted, and you weren't letting go. What does that have to do with anything? You've always known what you wanted, Ruby. Even as a little girl, you had such clear ideas about how things should be. It's one of your greatest strengths. But sometimes I wonder if you hold on so tight to your plans that you forget to leave room for surprises." Ruby felt like her father had just reached into her chest and squeezed her heart.
Madison destroying my dress wasn't a surprise, Papa. It was a disaster. Maybe. Or maybe it was an opportunity to ask yourself some questions you've been avoiding. Before Ruby could ask what he meant, David appeared at her side. There you are. My parents are wondering if we're going to do the toast soon. We're running a little behind schedule. Miguel squeezed Ruby's shoulder gently. Think about what I said, mija. And remember, sometimes the most beautiful things come from letting go of the plan. As her father walked away, David took Ruby's arm. Everything okay? You seemed upset earlier. Ruby looked at her fiancé, really looked at him. David was handsome in an understated way, with his neat brown hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He was wearing a navy blue blazer and khakis, an outfit that was perfectly appropriate for a rehearsal dinner. Everything about David was appropriate, safe, predictable. Did you really tell your parents that my sister had an artistic episode? David had the grace to look embarrassed. Ruby, they were asking questions about the dress situation. I had to tell them something. You had to tell them that my family is crazy? I didn't say crazy, I said eccentric. And Ruby, you have to admit, what Madison did was pretty out there. Out there according to who? Your parents? Your vision of what a normal family looks like? Ruby, come on. You can't seriously tell me you think dyeing a wedding dress is normal behavior. No, it's not normal. But it's not crazy either. It's just Madison being Madison. And maybe that's not such a terrible thing. David looked genuinely confused. I don't understand what you're trying to say. And that, Ruby realized, was exactly the problem. David didn't understand. He didn't understand her family, he didn't understand why she might be conflicted about the dress situation, and he didn't understand why his dismissive attitude might hurt her. The toasts, Ruby said finally. We should do the toasts. They walked back toward the main group, but Ruby felt like she was moving through water. Everything seemed surreal and distant. She watched David's father stand up and raise his glass, delivering a perfectly appropriate speech about marriage and partnership and shared goals. She watched her own father respond with a toast that was more poetic and heartfelt, talking about love as an adventure and marriage as a canvas for creating something beautiful together. When it was David's turn to speak, he stood up and delivered what was essentially a prepared statement about how grateful he was to have found someone who shared his values and his vision for the future. To Ruby, David concluded, who makes my life better in every measurable way. The guests clapped and raised their glasses, and Ruby smiled and said thank you, but all she could think about was the word measurable. David loved her in measurable ways, quantifiable ways, ways that could be put on a spreadsheet and analyzed for efficiency. When had that started feeling like not enough? As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Ruby found herself standing with Madison, who had been uncharacteristically quiet all evening. "How are you doing?" Madison asked softly. "I honestly don't know," Ruby admitted. "I owe you an apology. A real one. Not the kind where I try to explain why I thought I was right." Ruby looked at her sister in surprise. Madison rarely admitted to being wrong about anything, especially when it came to artistic matters. "I was so focused on what I thought you needed that I completely ignored what you actually wanted, and that was selfish and wrong, and I'm sorry." Ruby felt some of the tension in her chest ease slightly. "Thank you. That means a lot." "I still think you look amazing in bright colors," Madison said with a small smile. "But that should be your choice, not mine." As Ruby drove home to her apartment that night, leaving David to handle the final coordination details for tomorrow, she found herself taking a detour through Old Town Scottsdale. She ended up parked outside the boutique where she had found her original dress, staring at the darkened windows and wondering what would have happened if she had just kept the dress at her apartment like her instincts had told her to do. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. "Great rehearsal. See you at the altar tomorrow. Love you." Ruby stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, "See you tomorrow." She couldn't bring herself to write "love you" back, not because she didn't love David, she did, in her own careful, measured way, but because for the first time in 2 years, she wasn't sure that that love was enough. As she sat in her car in the empty parking lot, Ruby realized that tomorrow she was supposed to promise to spend the rest of her life with someone who thought her family was eccentric, who loved her in measurable ways, and who had never once asked her if she was truly happy. The question was she brave enough to admit that might not be what she wanted anymore?
Ruby woke up on her wedding day to the sound of rain. Not the gentle, romantic drizzle that might add a touch of whimsy to outdoor wedding photos, but the kind of aggressive desert downpour that only happened a few times a year in Phoenix and always seemed to occur at the worst possible moment. She lay in bed listening to the water drumming against her apartment windows, wondering if this was some kind of cosmic joke. Her phone showed 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. The wedding was scheduled to start at 4 p.m. at the Desert Botanical Garden, and based on the apocalyptic weather reports Jessica was forwarding her, the outdoor ceremony was going to be a muddy disaster. Ruby sat up in bed and realized she felt nothing. No panic, no desperation to find solutions, no urgent need to start making phone calls to save the day, just a strange, hollow calm that was somehow more unsettling than hysteria would have been. Her phone rang. David. "Ruby, thank God. Have you seen the weather? We need to start making alternate plans immediately. I've already called 3 indoor venues, but everything's booked. My dad thinks we should postpone." "Good morning to you, too," Ruby said quietly. "What? Oh, good morning. But Ruby, we have a serious problem here. The garden is going to be completely unusable. We need to..." Ruby hung up. She stared at the phone for a moment, surprised by her own action. She never hung up on people. She was the problem solver, the crisis manager, the one who stayed calm under pressure. But as she sat in her quiet apartment, listening to the rain and the muffled sounds of the city waking up, she realized she didn't want to solve this problem. Maybe that was the real problem. Her phone rang again. David, presumably calling back to figure out what had gone wrong with their connection. Ruby turned the phone face down and walked to her kitchen to make coffee. As the coffee brewed, Ruby found herself thinking about her conversation with her father the night before. She had been holding on to her plans so tightly that she hadn't left room for surprises. But what if the surprises were trying to tell her something? A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Ruby peered through the peephole and was shocked to see Abuela Rosa standing in the hallway, holding an umbrella and wearing a bright yellow raincoat that made her look like a determined sunflower. "Abuela?" Ruby opened the door, confused. "What are you doing here? How did you even get my address?" "Elena gave it to me, and I'm here because I have something to tell you, and it couldn't wait." Ruby had always been a little intimidated by Abuela Rosa. At 83, her grandmother was a force of nature who had raised 6 children, buried 2 husbands, and run a successful catering business in Tucson for 40 years. She was the kind of woman who spoke her mind without apology and had no patience for self-pity or indecision. "Coffee?" Ruby offered, mostly because she didn't know what else to say. "Sí, gracias." Abuela Rosa settled herself at Ruby's small kitchen table and fixed her granddaughter with a steady gaze. "We need to talk about this wedding." Ruby felt her stomach drop. "Abuela, if you're here to lecture me about Madison and the dress, I'm not here to talk about Madison. I'm here to talk about you." Abuela Rosa accepted the coffee mug Ruby offered her and took a careful sip. "Ruby, mija, how long have you been planning this wedding?" 8 months. You know that."
No, I mean really planning it. How long have you been planning to marry David? Ruby frowned. Since he proposed, obviously. That's not what I'm asking. Abuela Rosa leaned forward. I'm asking when you decided this was the life you wanted. When you decided that David was the man you wanted to spend forever with. When you decided that a traditional wedding in a garden with ivory dresses and string quartet music was your dream. Ruby opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. It was a simple question, but she found herself unable to provide a simple answer. You want to know what I think? Abuela Rosa continued without waiting for a response. I think you never decided any of those things. I think you just followed the plan that seemed safest and most reasonable, and you convinced yourself it was what you wanted. That's not true, Ruby protested, but her voice lacked conviction. When your grandfather, your first abuelo, may he rest in peace, when he asked me to marry him, I said no. Ruby stared at her grandmother in shock. What? But you were married for 30 years. See, but not the first time he asked. The first time, I said no because I knew I was saying yes for the wrong reasons. He was a good man. He had a steady job. My parents liked him. It would have been a sensible marriage. But I didn't love him. Not the way a woman should love the man she marries. So what happened? I broke his heart. And mine too. He went away for 2 years. I dated other men, lived my life, figured out who I was when I wasn't trying to be the person everyone expected me to be. When he came back, we were different people, older, more sure of ourselves. And when he asked me again, I said yes because I couldn't imagine my life without him, not because I couldn't imagine a life with anyone else. Ruby felt tears starting to form. Are you saying I should call off my wedding? I'm saying you should ask yourself why you want to get married today. Not why you should, not why it makes sense, not why everyone expects you to. Why you want to. The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Ruby had spent 8 months planning this wedding, 2 years building a relationship with David, her entire adult life building toward this moment of stability and security. But when had she stopped to ask herself if any of it made her happy? I don't know, Ruby whispered. Then you have your answer, Abuela Rosa said gently. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, listening to the rain and the distant sounds of Saturday morning traffic. Ruby found herself thinking about the child in Madison's photo, the 7-year-old who wasn't afraid to get messy, who painted with abandon, and grinned at the camera with pure joy. Abuela, can I ask you something else? Of course, mija.
Do you think I'm boring? Abuela Rosa laughed, a rich, warm sound that filled Ruby's small kitchen. Boring? Ruby, you organized your sister's quinceañera when you were 14. You started your own tutoring business in high school and saved enough money to pay for your first year of college. You learned to change your own oil because you didn't want to depend on anyone else to take care of your car. Boring is not the word I would use. Then what word would you use? Careful. Maybe too careful. Abuela Rosa reached across the table and took Ruby's hand. There's nothing wrong with being careful, mija. The world needs careful people. But there's a difference between being careful and being afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid of disappointing people. Afraid of making mistakes. Afraid of being too much or not enough or different from what people expect. Abuela Rosa squeezed Ruby's hand. Afraid of being yourself. Ruby felt something break open in her chest, not painful, but like a door that had been locked for too long finally swinging open. I think I've been afraid for a long time, Ruby admitted. I know you have. We all have. Your sister Madison is afraid too.
afraid that she's not serious enough, not responsible enough, not good enough to be taken seriously. That's why she went overboard with your dress. She was trying to prove she could do something meaningful for you. And David? Abuela Rosa was quiet for a moment. David is afraid of uncertainty. He wants everything to be predictable and controllable. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not compatible with someone who's learning to embrace uncertainty. Are you saying David and I are wrong for each other? I'm saying you're becoming someone new, and David fell in love with who you used to be. Maybe he can grow with you, maybe he can't, but you need to figure out who you're becoming before you can know if he's the right person to become it with. Ruby's phone had been buzzing intermittently throughout their conversation. Now it rang insistently, Jessica's ringtone. You should answer that, Abuela Rosa said. Your friend is probably worried about you. Ruby picked up the phone. Hey, Jess. Ruby, thank God. I've been trying to reach you for an hour. David called me in a panic saying you hung up on him and aren't answering your phone. The garden is flooded. We need to figure out plan B and... Jess, slow down. Ruby, we need to make some decisions here. The ceremony's supposed to start in 6 hours and we don't have a venue. Ruby looked at Abuela Rosa, who was watching her with patient, knowing eyes. What if we didn't need a plan B? Ruby asked quietly. What do you mean? What if we just didn't have the wedding today? The silence on the other end of the phone stretched for so long that Ruby wondered if the call had dropped. Ruby, Jessica said finally, very carefully, are you saying what I think you're saying? I don't know what I'm saying yet, but I know I can't walk down an aisle today and promise to spend the rest of my life with someone when I don't even know who I am. Oh, honey. Jessica's voice was full of relief and concern in equal measure. Are you okay? Do you want me to come over? I'm okay. I think I'm more okay than I've been in a long time, actually. Ruby looked at her grandmother, who nodded encouragingly. But I need to make some phone calls, and I need to figure out how to tell David that I'm not ready to be his wife. I'll help you with whatever you need. You know that, right? I know. Thank you. After she hung up, Abuela Rosa stood and gathered her purse and umbrella. Where are you going? Ruby asked. Home. You have work to do, and you need to do it yourself. Abuela Rosa paused at the door. Ruby, whatever you decide, make sure it's your decision, not your parents', not David's, not even mine. Yours. Abuela, see? Thank you for coming here, for telling me about Abuelo, for giving me permission to not know what I want. Abuela Rosa smiled. Mija, you don't need permission to be uncertain. Uncertainty is just the space where all the possibilities live. After her grandmother left, Ruby sat at her kitchen table and stared at her phone. She had calls to make, people to notify, a wedding to cancel. She had to tell David that she wasn't ready to be his wife, tell her parents that the reception they had helped pay for wasn't happening, tell 30 guests that they should probably make other plans for the day. It should have felt overwhelming. It should have felt like a disaster. Instead, it felt like the first truly honest thing she had done in years. Ruby picked up her phone and started dialing. The hardest call was to David. Ruby sat in her apartment for 20 minutes after Abuela Rosa left, staring at her phone and rehearsing different ways to say, I can't marry you today. Nothing sounded right. How do you tell someone that you realized you've been sleepwalking through your own life? When she finally dialed his number, David answered on the first ring. Ruby, thank God. I've been going crazy. My mom found a church that might be available this afternoon, and David, stop. Ruby's voice was steadier than she expected. We need to talk. Of course we need to talk. We need to figure out the venue situation and call all the guests. And no, David, we need to talk about us. The silence that followed was deafening. Ruby could practically hear David's mind working, trying to process what she was really saying. Ruby, If this is about the rain, we can work around it. Weddings don't have to be perfect to be meaningful. Ruby closed her eyes. Even now, David was trying to solve the logistics instead of hearing what she was actually saying. It's not about the rain. It's about me, about us, about the fact that I woke up this morning and realized I don't know why I want to get married today. Another long pause. You're having cold feet. That's normal. Every bride gets nervous. This isn't cold feet, David. This is me realizing that I've been planning a wedding without ever really deciding if I want to be married. Ruby, you're not making sense. We've been together for 2 years. We live together half the time. We've talked about our future, our goals. We've talked about logistics. We've made plans. But David, when was the last time you asked me if I was happy? You seemed happy. You never said you weren't happy. And there it was, the fundamental disconnect between them. David measured her happiness by the absence of complaints, not by the presence of joy. I need to postpone the wedding, Ruby said quietly. Postpone? For how long? Ruby realized she didn't have an answer to that question. I don't know. I need time to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to be the person everyone expects me to be. This is about your family, isn't it? David's voice took on an edge of frustration. Your sister ruins your dress and suddenly you're questioning our entire relationship? David, please don't make this about Madison. This is about me realizing that I've been so focused on doing the right thing that I forgot to ask myself what I actually want. And what you want is to humiliate me in front of our families and friends? Ruby felt a flash of anger. What I want is to be honest with you, with myself, with everyone. I'm sorry if that's inconvenient for you. The conversation continued for another painful 10 minutes with David cycling through disbelief, anger, and attempts at negotiation. Finally, Ruby had to hang up, not in anger this time, but in exhaustion. Some conversations couldn't be finished in a single phone call. The next call was to her parents, who took the news with surprising grace. Elena cried a little, but Miguel just asked if Ruby was okay and what she needed from them. I need to figure out who I am, Ruby told him. Then that's what you should do, mija. We'll handle everything else. Calling the guests was easier than Ruby had expected, mostly because Jessica volunteered to make most of the calls while Ruby handled the vendors. By noon, the immediate crisis was managed. The wedding was officially canceled. The deposits were mostly non-refundable, but that was a problem for later. And Ruby was officially unemployed from the job of being a bride. She was sitting on her couch, still in her pajamas, when Madison knocked on her door. I brought emergency supplies, Madison announced, holding up a bag that appeared to contain ice cream, wine, and what looked like art supplies. Art supplies? I thought we could paint together, like when we were kids. Madison hesitated. Unless you don't want to, I know I'm probably the last person you want to see right now. Ruby surprised herself by smiling. Actually, you might be exactly the person I need to see right now. They set up on Ruby's small balcony, which had stopped raining but was still overcast and cool. Madison had brought watercolors and paper, and they sat cross-legged on towels, painting and talking in a way they hadn't since they were children. I'm sorry about the dress, Madison said as she painted what appeared to be a desert sunset in shades of purple and orange. I'm sorry I didn't ask you first. I'm not sorry about the dress itself. It was beautiful in its own way, but I'm sorry I took that choice away from you. Ruby was attempting to paint a flower, though it looked more like a colorful blob. I think I understand why you did it. At least I'm starting to. Yeah? You saw me disappearing into this version of myself that was all beige and safe and appropriate, and you wanted to remind me that I used to be different. The problem is you can't force someone to remember who they used to be. They have to choose to remember.
Madison looked up from her painting. Are you remembering?
Ruby considered this as she watched the watercolors bleeding into each other on the paper. I'm trying to. It's harder than I thought it would be. They painted in comfortable silence for a while. Ruby found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in months. There was something about the unpredictability of watercolors, the way they flowed and mixed and created unexpected results that felt like a metaphor for everything she was trying to learn about herself. Can I ask you something? Ruby said eventually. Sure. Are you happy? With your life, I mean? Living in the garage, making art, never knowing if you'll have enough money to pay rent? Madison was quiet for a long moment. Most of the time, yeah. It's scary sometimes, not knowing what's coming next, but I'd rather be scared and alive than safe and numb. Safe and numb. Ruby realized that was exactly how she had been feeling for months, maybe years. I don't know how to be anything other than safe, Ruby admitted. Sure you do. You just proved it by canceling your wedding 4 hours before the ceremony. That's the opposite of safe. Ruby laughed, and it felt good. I guess you're right. Jessica arrived an hour later with Chinese takeout and more wine. The three of them sat on Ruby's living room floor, eating lo mein and discussing what Ruby's next steps might be. I think I need to move out of my apartment, Ruby said, surprising herself with the declaration. Why? Jessica asked. Because David and I picked it together. Everything in it is a compromise between what he wanted and what I thought I should want. I need to find out what I actually want. Where will you go? Ruby looked around her apartment, the neutral colors, the practical furniture, and the complete absence of anything that reflected her personality, and made another impulsive decision. I want to stay with you guys for a while, at the family house. Madison nearly choked on her wine. Really? You want to live in our chaos voluntarily? Maybe I need some chaos in my life. Maybe I need to remember what it feels like to live somewhere where people express themselves honestly, even if it's messy. Over the next 2 weeks, Ruby discovered that rebuilding yourself was both easier and harder than she had expected. Moving out of her apartment was surprisingly simple. Most of the furniture had been chosen by David anyway, and she realized she had very few possessions that felt truly hers. What was harder was learning to live without the constant structure and planning that had defined her adult life. At the family house, there was no schedule. Dinner might happen at 6 p.m. or 8 p.m., depending on who was home and what anyone felt like cooking. The living room might be rearranged overnight because Jake decided it would look better facing the other direction. Madison might decide to paint a mural on the garage wall at 11 p.m. because inspiration struck. At first, the unpredictability made her anxious. She found herself making lists and trying to impose order on the beautiful chaos. But gradually, she began to appreciate the spontaneity. When Miguel suggested a midnight trip to get ice cream, Ruby found herself saying yes instead of pointing out that it was a Tuesday and they all had to be up early. When Elena decided to redecorate the kitchen, Ruby volunteered to help instead of explaining why the current layout was more efficient. Most importantly, Ruby began to paint again. Madison set up a corner of the garage as Ruby's workspace, and Ruby found herself there almost every evening, experimenting with colors and techniques she hadn't touched since childhood. Her paintings weren't good. She was years out of practice, but they were hers in a way that nothing in her old life had been. 3 weeks after the canceled wedding, Ruby was in her makeshift studio when David came by the house. She heard voices from the front yard and looked out to see him standing near his car, talking to Miguel. Even from a distance, Ruby could see the tension in David's posture. Ruby walked outside, her hands still stained with paint. "Hi," she said simply. "Hi, you're really doing this, the whole artistic thing. I'm figuring out who I am. Art is just part of it. Ruby, I've been thinking about what you said. About us. About whether you're happy." David took a breath. "I want you to be happy. I want us to work." Ruby felt her heart ache for him. David was a good man. He was trying, in his own way, to understand what was happening. "I want us to work too," Ruby said honestly,
But I think we need to figure out if we can work as the people we're becoming, not the people we used to be. What does that mean? Ruby looked at David, then at the colorful chaos of her family's house behind her, and then at her paint-stained hands. It means I need more time, and you need to decide if you can love the version of me that I'm discovering. David followed his gaze to her hands. And if I can't? Ruby met his eyes. Then we'll know we made the right choice. As David drove away, Ruby realized she wasn't afraid of his answer anymore. For the first time in her adult life, she was more interested in being authentic than in being safe. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure.
6 months after the wedding that never happened, Ruby Chen-Martinez stood in the children's wing of the Phoenix Art Museum, watching a group of 8-year-olds attack their canvases with the kind of fearless enthusiasm she was still learning to embrace. Remember, she told them, there are no mistakes in art, only discoveries. A little girl named Sophia raised her paint-covered hand. But what if I don't like what I discovered? Ruby smiled, thinking of her own journey over the past half year. Then you paint over it and discover something new. Teaching art to children hadn't been part of any 5-year plan Ruby had ever made, but when Madison mentioned that the community center where she taught was looking for additional instructors, something inside Ruby had whispered yes before her practical mind could object. To everyone's surprise, including her own, Ruby was a natural teacher. She had the organizational skills to structure lessons and the patience to guide young artists through their creative experiments. More importantly, she had learned to see creativity not as chaos to be controlled, but as a conversation between intention and surprise. As the children worked on their paintings, Ruby found herself thinking about the tie-dyed wedding dress that still hung in Madison's studio. After months of looking at it nearly every day, Ruby had made peace with what her sister had done. The dress was bold and unconventional and completely impractical for the wedding she had planned. It was also undeniably beautiful in its own vibrant way, just like the life she was building now. "Miss Ruby, look!" One of her students, a boy named Marcus, held up a painting that was supposed to be a landscape, but looked more like an explosion of color. "That's even better," Ruby told him, and meant it. Sometimes the best art happens when we stop trying to control the outcome. After class, Ruby packed up her supplies and headed home, not to the cramped apartment she had shared with David, but to the small casita she was renting in downtown Phoenix. It was tiny, slightly shabby, and completely hers. The walls were painted in colors she actually liked: warm terracotta in the living room, sage green in the bedroom, and a cheerful yellow that reminded her of Abuela Rosa's raincoat on that pivotal morning. The casita was furnished with an eclectic mix of thrift store finds, family hand-me-downs, and a few pieces she had made herself during weekend woodworking classes. It looked nothing like the pages of the home design magazine she used to study religiously. Instead, it looked like Ruby. Not the Ruby who tried to be appropriate and safe, but the Ruby who was learning to trust her own instincts about what brought her joy. As she unlocked her front door, Ruby's phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Wine and gossip night at my place. I have news." Ruby texted back, "On my way, bringing that weird cheese you like." Jessica's news turned out to be a job offer in Seattle, a promotion that would require her to relocate in 2 months. As they sat on Jessica's couch, sharing wine and the fancy cheese Ruby had splurged on, Jessica looked uncharacteristically nervous. "I'm worried about leaving you," Jessica admitted. "I know you're doing better, but this whole rebuilding thing is still pretty new." Ruby considered this. 6 months ago, the thought of Jessica moving across the country would have sent her into a panic. Jessica had been her anchor through the wedding cancellation, the breakup with David, and all the upheaval that followed. But now, Ruby realized she wasn't afraid of Jessica leaving. She was sad about it, certainly, but not afraid. "I'm going to miss you terribly," Ruby said honestly. "But Jess, I think I'm okay. Really okay.
For the first time in my adult life, I think I know who I am. And who are you? Ruby thought about the question that once seemed so impossible to answer. I'm someone who likes bright colors and messy art projects. I'm someone who needs both structure and spontaneity to be happy. I'm someone who wants to help other people discover their creativity. I'm someone who's learning that plans are good, but flexibility's better. Jessica smiled. And what about David? Ruby's relationship with David had been complicated over the past 6 months. They had tried dating again briefly, but it became clear that they wanted fundamentally different things from life. David needed predictability and clear outcomes. Ruby was learning to embrace uncertainty and open-ended questions. The breakup, when it finally came, had been sad but mutual. David and I are friends now, Ruby said. Real friends, I think, for the first time since we started dating. He's seeing someone new, a woman from his accounting firm who loves spreadsheets as much as he does. They're perfect for each other. And you're okay with that? I'm happy for him, Ruby said, and realized she meant it. We were trying to force something that wasn't meant to be. Now we can both be with people who appreciate us for who we actually are.
Later that evening, Ruby drove to her family's house for their weekly Sunday dinner. These dinners had become one of her favorite traditions, not because they were perfectly organized, they weren't, but because they were perfectly themselves. Tonight, Miguel was experimenting with a new fusion recipe that combined Mexican and Thai flavors. Elena was working on a mosaic project at the dining room table that would probably take months to finish. Jake was showing off photos from his latest urban exploration adventure, this time legally sanctioned by a gallery that was commissioning a photography series. And Madison was working on a new painting, a commission from a local restaurant that wanted something vibrant but sophisticated for their dining room. "How's business?" Ruby asked her sister as they set the table together. "Good, actually. Really good." Madison smiled. "Turns out there are a lot of people who want art that's colorful but not chaotic. Who knew?" "You're learning to find the balance between expression and accessibility." "Something like that. I'm learning that just because I want to make bold art doesn't mean it has to be overwhelming. Kind of like how you're learning that just because you like structure doesn't mean everything has to be planned to death." Ruby laughed. "When did we both get so wise?" "I think we've always been wise," Madison said thoughtfully. "We just had to learn to trust ourselves." During dinner, Elena made an announcement that surprised everyone. She was going back to school to get her master's degree in art therapy. "At my age," she said, preempting the obvious question. "Why not? Ruby's taught me that it's never too late to discover new parts of yourself." After dinner, Ruby found herself alone with Abuela Rosa in the kitchen, drying dishes while the rest of the family argued about whether Jake's latest photograph was genius or just lucky. "You look different, mija," her grandmother observed. "Different how?" "Lighter. Like you're not carrying around a weight you don't need anymore." Ruby considered this as she dried a plate painted with cheerful sunflowers, one of Elena's thrift store finds that would have horrified Ruby's old aesthetic sensibilities, but now made her smile every time she saw it. "I think I spent so many years trying to be perfect that I forgot how to be happy. Now I'm learning that perfect is overrated." "And what have you learned is underrated?" Ruby thought about her art classes, her colorful casita, her deepening friendships with her family, the way she now said yes to adventures instead of automatically checking her calendar first. "Mess," she said finally. "Beautiful, creative, life-giving mess." Later that night, Ruby sat in Madison's studio looking at the tie-dyed wedding dress that had started this entire journey. Madison had offered to donate or throw it away countless times, but Ruby had asked her to keep it. "Why?" Madison had asked. "Because it's part of my story now. The part where I learned that sometimes the things that feel like disasters are actually gifts in disguise."
Now, 6 months later, Ruby reached out and touched the vibrant fabric. The dress was still completely impractical and utterly inappropriate for the wedding she had planned, but it was also bold and joyful and unapologetically itself. Just like the woman she was becoming. Ruby's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She opened it to find a photo of a couple at what appeared to be a wedding reception, both of them laughing as they danced. The bride was wearing a simple white sheath dress, and the groom was David. The text read, "Thank you for having the courage to be honest. We're both exactly where we're supposed to be. David." Ruby stared at the photo for a long moment, then typed back, "Congratulations. You both look radiant." As she put her phone away, Ruby realized that this was what closure felt like. Not bitter or sad, but peaceful and complete. David was happy with someone who loved his spreadsheets and 5-year plans. Ruby was happy creating art and teaching children and living in a yellow kitchen that made her smile every morning. Walking to her car, Ruby caught sight of herself in the rearview mirror. She was wearing a flowing skirt and shades of turquoise and coral, colors she never would have chosen a year ago. Her hair was longer and wilder than she used to wear it, and there was paint under her fingernails from the children's art class. She looked like someone who had learned to color outside the lines. Ruby smiled at her reflection and drove home toward home. Not the home she had planned, but the one she had discovered. And for the first time in her adult life, she had no idea what would happen next. It was terrifying and wonderful, and exactly where she belonged.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.